I prefer the lonely places, wandering behind a pair of bird dogs in search of what's over the next hill. My passion for upland hunting has led me to multiple states. These travels have allowed me to see the beauty of this great land and meet some interesting people. I hope to introduce you to many of these people and encourage you to look for what's over your next hill. Today I'm talking with Tel Judkins of Perkins, Oklahoma, about his work as the upland game biologist for the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation. The podcast is sponsored by Pike Gear. An upland hunter who hunts hard needs clothing that is light, makes hunting easier, not harder. An upland hunter is always on the move and always thinking about his next move. He needs clothing that can move with him, clothing that doesn't hold him back or weigh him down. Pike Gear is designed for upland hunters who are always on the go and always dreaming about their next hunting trip. My Pike Gear is serving me well this season. I've worn the Kiowa pants and Kiowa shirt virtually every day that I've been in the field this year, and it's been much more durable than I expected, and certainly lightweight. Additionally, my friend John Moore of JM Knives is sponsoring the podcast. John Moore makes custom knives to order. The beautiful and effective bird knife John made for me is a functional work of art. Let him make you a custom order knife you'll be proud to show your hunting partners. Message me on Instagram for John's contact information. And why don't you tell people about yourself?
Absolutely, Ryan. First off, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and I hope that we can work with some hunters and some landowners and really help to spread the message about what we're doing in quail conservation. So my name is Tel Judkins. I'm the upland game biologist with the Oklahoma Department of Wildlife Conservation. I've worked with the department since I'm working on about 5 years now. I started out as a game warden back in 2014. I started working in Cleveland County and then worked in Oklahoma County for a year, and then I transferred into this position back in January of this year, and have really enjoyed that transition to be able to go from a really broad-scale conservation mindset in a really focused area to really focused conservation in a really broad scale. So it's been really great getting to go out and work with the entire state of Oklahoma and sportsmen across the land and landowners across the state to really try to make a positive impact on our upland birds and our upland bird hunting here in the state.
You know, that's a fascinating journey that you're talking about, going from being a state game warden to then going to the conservation side. That really fascinates me because, some of the people that I've known that wanted to be game wardens, they never dreamed about being anything else.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's not something, when I started out in college, I wanted a job where I could work with people about animals. So, working as a game warden really kind of filled that itch for a little while. I kind of fell in love with that job. And the more that I did it, I really started thinking, there's got to be a better way that I can, use my passions to help out Oklahoma and Oklahoma wildlife and Oklahoma sportsmen. And this position happened to open up and be advertised, and it was a shoe-in. And it's been a really good fit. I've enjoyed the last year, and I look forward to many more getting to do what I'm doing now.
And it's not been, it doesn't necessarily parallel what I like to talk about on the podcast, but you've been a game warden in two of the more populous counties in the state of Oklahoma. Yeah. And the idea of being a game warden in Oklahoma County is just incredibly fascinating to me. I know that there's some hunting in some of the green spaces there in Oklahoma County, probably some deer hunting, I would guess.
Yeah. Well, and the problems with it a game warden encounters are the same no matter what county. So there's poachers in every county, whether that's, downtown Oklahoma City or in the middle of, Alva, Oklahoma. There's going to be that crime element associated with wildlife. And, being what they call a metro game warden, working in those metro counties, you're really kind of, to talk about the game wardens being the face of the department. The ones that are in those really populated areas are even more so. The wild animals are still there just as plentiful as they are in other counties, but we have to add in that human element to make the job a little bit more complicated. And you also see your fair share of non-wildlife related things. So I joke that, in my 4.5 years of law enforcement in the state, I did just about everything that can be associated with the fun side of law enforcement. So I don't really feel like I'm going to miss out on anything by ducking out of that career a little earlier than most.
And I hate to be this way. It probably shows my own bias, but I could just see you getting a call because somebody's poached a big buck off of one of those big gated estates out in South Edmond, Southwest Edmond, and they've been feeding this deer for years, and it's some lady's pet, and some guy sneaks out there and shoots it.
I've worked deer cases where the deer literally had a collar on it, so God. It's you see a little bit of everything. So
were you the only game warden in Oklahoma County?
So in Oklahoma County, there's actually 3, and in Cleveland County, there's 2. So that was another perk that, you've usually got somebody that, knows about wildlife law that's fairly close by if you get into a sticky situation and need an extra hand. But, I've worked a district that goes all the way from Stillwater to the Red River. So, you get to travel that whole corridor and work and see all sorts of different things throughout that district in a given year.
Some really good fishing in that country.
Yes, yeah. There's that whole kind of strip of Oklahoma just has a ton of water, good rivers. There's plenty of opportunity, and for wildlife. Right here on property that I'm on near Perkins, we've got quail, and that's not really where you think of as quail country, but we've got them here. And with proper land management, which we'll get into here in a little bit, anybody in the state of Oklahoma can have quail on their place. That's not something that's out of the realm of possibilities.
And this is going to sound like an odd question, but think about what I do, okay? Yeah. So if, like a state lake, if they find a body, did they call you?
Sometimes. It really depends. Like a lot of our state lakes, like Lake Thunderbird State Park or Stanley Draper, those are all still either managed or run by, like Lake Thunderbird has the state parks officers that are there, so they're like the park rangers. Stanley Draper has Oklahoma City's municipal police. So usually they're the ones that are primarily working a lot of these things, but sometimes even they get into a situation where, we don't really have the tools to go and do this. And so, I have been called in on situations like that to help out and lend a hand and see what I can do to make the job a little easier.
I'll be doggone. Yeah. I always figured that, the Highway Patrol probably were involved in a lot of that too. Strange as that may seem, but I think they have jurisdiction over the state's waterways as far as surface, and I know what little experience we've had with those circumstances here in Beaver County. The Highway Patrol has been the agency in charge.
Yeah, and then Highway Patrol also does boating accidents and all sorts of things like that. So, at the end of the day, it's everybody does the same job. Somebody else may be the lead on it, but everybody can help out and get the job done a little quicker and a little easier, and everybody go home safe on that law side.
Yeah. And before we stop talking about the game warden stuff, I'm going to tell you what we call our game warden here, and you know it, Mike, right? So, but it's not just Mike; it's what we've always called the game warden, whomever it was, including the one that's the head of the division now.
Yeah.
But I grew up referring to the game warden as the bird sheriff. Have you ever heard that term?
Well, there's bird sheriff, there's possum patrol, there's squirrel sheriff, there's perch police. There's all sorts of fun names. But I always said, as long as you don't call me late for supper, I'll be happy.
You'll respond. Well,
that's right. That's right.
Well, our bird sheriff does a fine job. I like him a lot.
Yeah, he's a good guy. But back to the background and stuff. Covering a little bit more on me that we had talked about was I got my bachelor's degree from Oklahoma State University in 2012. I studied wildlife ecology and management with, really focusing in on wildlife ecology and management, which, set me up really well for just about any job in the wildlife, career fields that you want to do. I focused in on upland species of a different variety. I kind of had focused on herpetology, which is reptiles and amphibians. Well, it turns out a lot of the things that those specialty classes that I took learning about reptiles and amphibians and their habitats parlays really well into upland game conservation. So it really provided a good shoe in and I'm excited to see what the future holds for not only me in this position, but our upland bird hunting as well.
Well, and that kind of surprises me a little bit. Explain to me. I mean, you said that there's a lot of parallels there.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, wild critters are found in a lot of the same places. So when it comes to, anybody that's been out with their bird dog long enough has probably come across a rattlesnake.
Mm-hmm.
So there again, that's that shared habitat. Looking at amphibians that are more in that riparian habitat, well, in that habitat, you learn a lot about the forbs and the overall biodiversity that's in that area. Well, those forbs are a primary food source for our quail. So there's a lot of overlap that even if you think you're kind of pigeonholing yourself into one trade, there's still a lot of room that may not even think about outside of that to really be able to branch out and work in multiple different fields. In fact, my first job out of college, I worked as basically I worked for one of the tribes here in Oklahoma doing stream monitoring. So I monitored water quality of surface waters that went in and out of tribal jurisdiction, looking at macroinvertebrates and microinvertebrates and fish species and plants and amphibians and all these things that correspond with water, which there again, a lot of that is stuff that I never thought I would have been working on while I was going through getting my degree.
Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun, too. Sounds like a neat job.
Growing up, they always said that, you'd never get paid for staring out the window all day. Well, that's about 90% of my job is either looking out the window or being out the window and in the great outdoors.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun. So as the upland game biologist for the department, what do you do?
So I've got a lot of hats that I wear with the department. Just in fact, this last week I was out in Oregon with one of our subcommittees through the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Associations, or WAFWA, where I'm a member of the Western Quail Working Group, where we get together and talk about all things Western quail, which here in Oklahoma primarily means our scaled quail. I'm also sit on the Pheasant Technical Committee. Our main goal there is talking about pheasant and pheasant conservation. And then I'm also part of the National Bobwhite Conservation Initiative, or the National Bobwhite Technical Committee. So there's, 3 national groups or range-wide groups that I work with to try to, talk about what Oklahoma's learning as far as on our management aspect, and then learn what other states are doing right to be able to bring those things back to Oklahoma.
So it's like knowledge sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really good. It's a great opportunity to get together and talk about all the things that have worked and haven't worked. Sometimes in the formal setting of a meeting room, and sometimes in the informal setting of behind a bird dog. But you can learn a whole lot just kind of getting together and sharing those opportunities and those experiences that each state has done. On top of that, though, I also manage all of the Oklahoma research that we do on our upland game, whether it's bobwhite primarily or scaled quail work or pheasant work. So I make sure all of our roadside surveys get done every year, our brood surveys get done every year. We have a focal area down at Cross Timbers Wildlife Management Area that we do several forms of research on associated with the National Bobwhite Technical Committee, which is a big range-wide organization. I'm also act as a liaison with Oklahoma State University or any of our other research partners, which currently also includes the University of Georgia, and make sure that those projects are running smoothly and that everything that we said we were going to accomplish is being accomplished. And ultimately the job in itself is to do everything that I can to make sure that we're doing everything we can to have the best crop of bobwhite possible next year, and the year after that, and the year after that.
And part of that is learning.
Absolutely.
About the birds.
Yep.
And then the other part of it, I guess, is making recommendations to the biologists on the publicly owned property about what they can do to maximize opportunities on those properties.
Exactly. So it's working with our staff to make sure that we're doing the best that we can, which some of those WMAs are pretty big and only have a couple of guys to do the work. So that can sometimes, we've got to, take what we can as we go, but still make those recommendations to improve the public lands, but work with the private landowners, and then work with the universities to make sure that we're using the most current knowledge and most up to date skills and tools that are out there to really make the biggest impact.
Well, and I did a podcast, it's been a couple of months ago, with Dwayne Elmore over at Oklahoma State University, and Dr. Elmore was so fascinating to talk with.
He's a wealth of knowledge.
And just a really nice man, too.
Yes, yep.
And one of the things that he talked about was he was really complimentary of the Department of Wildlife Conservation as far as the funding of studies. Can you kind of explain what that means? I didn't really ask him to go into a lot of detail.
Well, so there's a lot of potential, and especially like when we talk about using federal funds. So you as a sportsman, you go and you buy a firearm. You go and you buy shells for your gun, a fishing pole, any of these things that are, direct hunting or fishing related items. There's an excise tax on that before it ever reaches the academy or Walmart or whatever store you were shopping at.
Pittman Robertson.
Yes, so Pittman Robertson is on the hunting side. And so that money can then be earmarked to the states to be able to use for wildlife restoration, for research, for the management of the resource. So a lot of it can also be used for hunter education and things like that. So that opens up a pretty big pot of money at the end of the day to be able to pull from. And so the state has to provide match funds that come from the sale of hunting and fishing licenses primarily. We can then get 3 times as much back. So if we were to put in $100,000, we can get $300,000 back.
I wonder what my dog's upset about.
No telling. Or maybe a quail outside the window.
No, probably the UPS dog this time of year.
Oh. May you hang on for a second? Or?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
No,
Lord knows I wouldn't be the only podcast that had dogs skittering around in the background.
That's no kidding. But so we can use these federal funds to really bulk up the dollars that we have available. So, for instance, we got this an OSU project going right now that we're calling Quail Ecology and Management 2. We finished up Quail Ecology and Management 1 a few years ago. And so we're, if we could have come up with $100,000, that gets you so far. But thanks to the Pittman Robertson funds, we're able to quadruple that to now have $400,000 to work with. And, at the end of the day, we all know that it takes dollars to get jobs done. And if you've got more dollars, you can do a bigger job. So we're able to do a lot more thanks to that. And we have a lot of leadership in our agency that is very pro upland game and upland game conservation and upland game research and upland game management. So we're in a really good position to take advantage of that situation and do as much as we can to make sure that the things that we're saying are good for quail are. So we actually can have the data to back that up. So right now we've got a really big project with Oklahoma State going where we're actually attaching GPS backpacks. So if you can picture about the size of a $50 but compressed down into about an oval, there's a backpack about that big. It's on the back of several quail on four of our WMAs around the state, where we're getting 18 GPS locations a day for every one of those collars that we've got out. Now, if you were to think about that, that would be tough to do in 1980, 1990, even 2000 when we were doing all of our telemetry work, where you go and you catch a quail and you put a little VHF transmitter on it, and then a technician or an OSU researcher has to go out with looks like an old VHF antenna like you would use on your TV and go track these quail by feet or by foot listening for beeps on the headphones. Now I can sit at my computer, punch in a website, hit download, and have 18 points for that day right at my fingertips.
Oh, that's so cool.
So it really gives us a lot more data than we were ever capable of getting, so much so that it's almost daunting to figure out what do we do with it now that we've got this data rolling in. But we've already seen some pretty cool movement patterns, and that's one of our hopes, is to see how the quail are utilizing the landscape, how they're being impacted by new road developments, mastication projects on a WMA, food plots. I mean, you name it, oil and natural gas development, or just, traffic load on a given road, to see what that's really doing to the quail. So
Well,
we've had,
that's
go
kind of a
ahead.
neat issue because, so like I focus on well pads in
Yep.
our country because even those old pads from the 70s where they've disturbed that earth, right, around the edges of those pads, there will be weeds and there'll be plum thickets a lot of times that have grown up. And
Well,
there's almost a covey on every well pad.
and the one thing you didn't mention there that's probably one of the biggest draws is you've got bare ground right there.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
of all that gravel. And that gravel makes for really easy bug hunting. And if there are any of those seeds that have, blown out of the surrounding plants, they're shining like a diamond in the meadow right there.
Oh,
So the bare ground component really is a big part there. And, as we talk in the research, we know that quail need at least 25% bare ground on a landscape to be able to have that brood survive on the ground. So, all of these things are knowledges that we've learned from this OSU research throughout we started in 1990, so we're at 29 years of quail research going on throughout the state of Oklahoma with Oklahoma State University.
well, and this is going to show my ignorance, which I show all the time. But how does that work from a really technical standpoint? Does a guy like Dr. Elmore say, "Hey, there's this area of bobwhite behavior that we don't know enough about," and so he puts together an idea of what of a study that he hopes to accomplish, educating about some area of and I'm just using bobwhite as an example, and then brings it to you or just to your board or to somebody there at the department and says, "Hey, if you fund me for X number of dollars, this is the study I propose that we do to learn the following things about bobwhite quail."
It's like that, but it's a lot more convoluted.
Okay.
So if it can be where, me as the quail biologist, going through all of the literature that's out there and, we really don't know something here. And then I could take it to OSU. What do you guys think about this? And, but at the end of the day, we all kind of get together to figure out what the questions are that we want to get answers to. And then you put together a packet that says this is what we want to do and this is how much it's going to take to do that. And then it would go to, up our chain all the way through our director and then on to the commissioners to see if they think that that's something that would be worthwhile for our sportsmen's money to go towards. And so we've been able to fill a lot of the knowledge gap throughout the years. And so on top of this GPS study, we're also doing we get annual satellite imagery so that we've got the latest and greatest aerial photography of those 4 WMAs. We're also doing insect work to know kind of what the insect population is around where the birds are moving, and what are the plants doing. So what's the plant life around where these quail are? So we can really get, if you think about it, in this 3D whole big picture of what a quail is doing. One of my hopes within this next spring is to be able to find, one quail's data for a good 24 hours and then go film a video of where this quail went, a day in the life of a bobwhite quail.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
We can now do that. And, at 10 o'clock, this quail was right here. And so it was feeding. It had already broken up from the covey and was out feeding, kind of scattered on its own before meeting back up in the shade for the afternoon. And then we can go to the 12 o'clock point, and yep, here it is under a sandplum thicket. So, there's the possibilities right now are pretty endless on what this data could reveal and what it could show us. But at the end of the day, it's going to show us that quail like good habitat. They want to move around in good habitat. And, that's the best message that we can then go and share to people is that, if you've got good management or good habitat, you'll have quail.
Well, and that brings another question to me, okay? Mm-hmm. So as a layperson who wants to perhaps learn as much about bobwhite quail and their habits as possible, how would I get access to what's been learned from those studies? What's the best way to understand what and be aware of what those studies are showing. Does
Gotcha.
that question make sense?
There's a lot of avenues that a person can take. In some instances, it can be difficult, and that's one thing that the scientific community is really working towards in the last few years is making this data available to people so that any Joe Blow can go and get a scientific document and have the word right from the horse's mouth, so to speak. But for today, the best way that a person can do it is to contact their local extension agent office, where they'll have the newest, latest, and greatest handouts from Oklahoma State, where most of this research is being done. They can also reach out and contact either a regional private lands biologist or myself. And, I would be happy to send them information or, in some instances, which another program that we offer is our quail enhancement program, where people can give me a holler and I will come out to your property and walk through it with you to figure out what can be done to better manage bobwhite quail or better manage pheasant or better manage turkey or deer or any of these things that really, if we manage for quail right, we've managed excellent for turkey, for quail, for everything else that an outdoors person loves to go outdoors for.
Oh, that's that. And what makes me ask that kind of question is I spend a lot of days in the field behind bird dogs.
Yeah.
And of course we have both bobwhites and blues, and I get asked a lot, would there be blues in this habitat? They're asking my opinion about whether we would expect to run into a covey of bobwhites or a covey of blues. And about 75% of the time it's a shot in the dark. I really don't know. I mean, I have a gut feeling in my own mind, and I'm much more apt to be accurate if I have some empirical data because I've had contact, for example, with a blue quail covey in that area.
Well, and that's the best data, and a handout from a university or me is not going to even give you that. If you found scalies there or blue quail there, that's the best thing. But my question to that would be, is there a broken down tractor nearby? Because that's perfect scaled quail habitat.
Yeah. Old equipment.
Yes. Yeah. An old arena or round pen. That's great.
And then another question I get a lot of, and I just don't know the answer, is how do the scaled quail nest differently than bobwhites do? Because of course, we find roosts moving through bobwhite habitat. I can point out a quail roost to somebody and say, look, that's where a covey has roosted recently. But I don't see that in what I consider the scaled quail habitat. I'm not able to put my finger on, hey, that's a roost, and nearly as often. And I oftentimes think when I do see a roost in what I'm thinking might be scaled quail habitat, that's probably bobs. It's probably bobwhite.
Well, as far as the roost, they roost pretty much the same. They're going to look for a ring of feces on the ground. That's your quail roost. But for the nesting component, the bobwhite is usually very specific. They want little blue stem. That's their favorite plant to nest in. Whereas the scaled quail is a little bit more generalistic, so they may nest up in some yucca. They may nest in some of the other bunch grasses. They may nest next to a log. So they're a little bit broader in what they would use for nesting habitat, but they're going to be more in that they want more bare ground than a bobwhite does. So that's, usually when I find a good number of blues, it's going to be like around a prairie dog town or around that old, feedlot or something like that where the grass component is just not there as much.
Where they can see.
Exactly.
That's always what I thought is a blue quail likes to be able to see.
Oh, they'll run for days once you get behind. Yeah. Yep. So another research avenue that we're going down right now is, a few years ago there was Operation Idiopathic Decline that was done out of Texas. And from that is where we kind of started talking about eyeworms and all of these different parasites. And that really paints a picture of doom and gloom. Oh my goodness, our birds they've got all these illnesses and things. So we wanted to really focus in on Oklahoma birds. And so we're working to reproduce that study, and look a little bit more zoomed in, if you will. So we're working with the University of Georgia's Southeastern Cooperative Wildlife Disease Study, or SQUIDIS, where A lot of acronyms in this world.
Yeah.
But so we trap birds twice a year and send birds to Georgia off of our WMAs to be able to. We get a report back that shows how our birds are doing. So if a bird has a hangnail, it's reported in there. If a bird has eyeworms, it's reported in there. If a bird has seagull worms, it's in there. Rice breast, it's in there. If there's something wrong with the bird and they can't quite figure it out, they dig until they can 100% say this is what's wrong with it. You know, it was exposed to West Nile 2 years ago and hasn't recovered yet. So, and it's pretty interesting because out of that original study, it sounded like, oh, the birds are doomed because of all these diseases. It turns out Oklahoma's birds are pretty healthy. We've actually got another year after this year, another year to go through and look at these disease vectors and really figure out what's ailing our birds. But, you know, like on the eyeworm topic, those were first documented in like 1938, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
They're still there. That would be like eradicating the flu to save the human race.
Yeah.
Like the flu might take a few lives every year, but it's not killing off the human race.
Good. And I think, I mean, I didn't even bother to check for eyeworms until I started seeing that stuff coming out of Texas, that information coming out of Texas. And lo and behold, that fall, you know, I killed some birds that, if they weren't blind, they were as close to blind as you can be. They were so full of worms. But then, so now I check my birds when I clean them. I won't say I check every single one of them, but I'll check a sampling of every bag at the end of the day when I'm cleaning birds. And I found Saturday, I found my first bird this year with an eyeworm, and he only had one that I found. He wasn't just full up and blind, but he darn sure had an eyeworm.
So, of the birds that you've shot that had them, did they fly right?
Not. I can remember killing at least two years ago that I was convinced were blind. They were different.
Okay.
In the air. I mean.
Okay.
And then, and now, you know, when you got 7 or 8 birds in your bag, or 5 or 6 birds in your bag, and you clean birds at the end of the day, and 2 of those have eyes that are virtually white with eyeworms, you know, there's no way to say that those were for sure the ones that flew awkwardly, for lack of a better term.
Right. Well, and my point with that is, you know, you've probably shot 100 birds since you started looking for eyeworms, and 2 of those. You remember something, or, you know, possibly 2 of those, something was wrong with them that, you know, they acted different.
That's right.
So out of 100 birds, really only 2 are showing that they were impacted. Can't be that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things then. But, you know, at the end of the day, that's, you know, we're still trying to push and find out, you know, what the disease risk of our birds is, you know, how healthy are they? And what we're finding is that across the state, they're pretty healthy. And we're pulling birds off of 10 different WMAs that range all the way from cross timbers in south central Oklahoma to Caw in north central Oklahoma, and Sandy Sanders and Hackberry and Beaver. So really everywhere west of I-35 is pretty well covered. And, you know, the message across the board is that they're doing pretty good. The big thing, though, is things like predation, things like disease, illnesses, parasites, you name it. It doesn't matter what the population is. There, some of, you know, disease, those vectors are going to kill some birds. That's just natural selection. The problem is now our population has gotten low because of bad land management. That number seems really high, when really it's the same. If we had 3 billion birds, it's about the same percentage that is being taken.
And I understand that it just feels like it's killing more of them because there's fewer of them around.
Yep. Well, and in the grand scheme of things, it might be killing a few more just by, you know, it seems that way. But at the end of the day, if we go and we feed, you know, medicated food, or we trap these birds and inoculate them, anytime you take a medicine, you're actually impairing your immune system in other ways. Yeah. So, like, if you go get a flu vaccine and you then turn around and get sick with a cold, well, how did that happen? You were healthy and fit as a fiddle. Well, your immune system was working so hard to build up those antibodies against the stuff we wanted you to fight that they didn't even see the other virus or disease or sickness coming in. And so they had no time to build up that immune response. So if we start feeding out these medicated foods and stuff, there is a risk that, something else can come through, like West Nile, like, cecal worms or bacteria, or, even like a common cold to a bird that could kill a substantial number of birds in one fell swoop. Think of it like with CWD in deer. Once it's in there, it spreads through like wildfire. And we definitely don't want that with our birds. And the same could be said with, pin-reared birds. There is a risk of disease spreading there because there's a lot of diseases that are known in the poultry industry that, they're medicated against and all of these things while they're in the pen. But once they're out of the pen, they could still be carrying these diseases that are, really, I don't want to say popular, but common in chickens and other poultry that the quail may be carrying and then spreads it to a wild quail covey, and then we have, disease going that way and new stuff that they don't really have any antibodies to fight.
And Mother Nature is so...
if I could control nature, I'd be a rich man.
Well, and they're so capable. When you think about those quail, the pressures, everything eats a quail in my country.
Yep.
I mean, everything wants to kill a quail.
They're delicious. So, everything wants to eat them.
Yeah.
But, there's really two things that are the biggest keys when it comes to quail management, and that's weather, and we can't control it. If we've got a great year, then great. If we don't, then, brace up. And deal with it. That's the Oklahoma weather way. The other thing is the habitat. And, you can go back and Google Earth, I use all the time, and we'll pull up a property, and it's got this little time slider where you can slide it back and look at the aerial imagery back to the early 90s, usually for a property. And you can see the impacts and the changes on a landscape that even in 30 years have just changed drastically. And that's your silver bullet for quail management. That's where are our quail going away? We're killing them off. They don't have a place to stay.
Yeah, we're too clean, not enough weeds. I mean, there's 100 different things.
Yeah, it's where in this part of the world where I'm at, and a little bit up where you are, is the red cedars. Those things, they use 22 gallons of water a day for one adult tree. That's 22 gallons that's not going into the creek, that's not watering forbs, it's not watering grass. That's, the red cedars are destroying Oklahoma. If we did nothing but cut down every red cedar, we would add easily 1 million acres of quail habitat.
And, of course, those are human created. We brought them here because we thought they were pretty.
Well, there's about 0.1% of them that should be in Oklahoma. So they are a native plant, but if you're to picture Black Mesa in your mind, and it's got these little crevices that run down the side of it where the water would flow off the top of it, that's where you would find a red cedar 1,000 years ago.
But not now.
Now you can throw a rock and hit one just about anywhere you stand in Oklahoma.
And I can take you around and show you homesteads, with a line of cedars on the north side. Yep. When that old cold wind starts blowing out of the northwest, they put those cedars up to block that wind on their homes.
Well, and if it was just that, where it was only that wind block, only that snow break, whatever you want to call it, that's fine. That's not really doing anything major. It's whenever the pasture that they're next to hasn't been managed and has, quote, been left for wildlife for decades on decades, and now there's red cedars filling up that pasture. And that's, the pasture that used to be quail habitat.
Yeah. So,
a little bit of prescribed fire through that property, and all of a sudden you have an instant quail food plot, for lack of better terms. It instantly turns back into a mansion for quail.
Well, when I interviewed Weston, he talked about these fire paddocks that are there south of the headquarters on the Beaver WMA. And he was trying to explain to me, and I'll mess it up, I'm sure, but he was saying that the timing of the fire was what they were trying to determine when it was best to burn.
So, each part of Oklahoma kind of has their own issues with when you do management. So if you go into like southwest Oklahoma, if you burn or disc or even drive through a property at certain months of the year, the only thing coming back is sandburrs. So we don't want that. That's bad for everybody. It's bad for the bird dog. It's bad for the bird hunter. It's not good for the bird. So we really want to be able to go through and around Oklahoma have different research plots to say, if you burn every year, this is what it looks like. If you burn every 2 years, this is what it looks like. If you spring burn, if you fall burn, if you summer burn, to really just have these to be able to bring people and show them, what do you want your property to look like? Pick, it's like you're a shopping center. Pick one. Pick your management plan. And that at the end of the day, if you go walk through those, which ones do you find quail on? That's the ones we want to manage for.
That's pretty interesting.
So, prescribed fire, I call it nature's duct tape and baling wire. It fixes it. Doesn't matter if it was not broken to begin with, it fixes it. Or it fixes it better. And that's, for tens of thousands of years, prescribed fire has been the management choice. A Native American tribe sitting on the plains 10,000 years ago, if they got hungry, they lit a fire. They burned 1,000 acres, 2,000 acres, whatever it may be. The bison could smell that smoke from miles and miles and miles away, and they'd come running. Because the first 4 inches of plant mass, whether that's, grasses, whether it's forbs, whether it's, woody plants, growing back, the first 4 inches of that plant has about 3 times the amount of nutrients as the standing plant would, as the adult plant would. So the first 4 inches of little blue stem is crazy high amounts of good forage for a bison, for a deer, for, a cow. Whereas the, things like cat claw sensitive briar or showy partridge pea, a couple of really good quail plants, those things with fire have like 18% crude protein in them. That's crazy high numbers to a cattle rancher or anybody that grazes anything. That's what you want when they're feeding out cubes that are only 12 to 14%. So it's better than the cubes that they're feeding. So really, if someone has a property that's native grasses, they can burn on a routine schedule and have everything that their cow's going to want to be fat and happy. Everything that their deer's going to want, their turkey's going to want, and everything that a bobwhite quail's going to want. All within, their nice little 40 acres. And so that really is the big key when it comes to the management side and what the fire management or fire research teaches us. And if we can hone in to really say, if you burn in July, you're going to get this and this and this. If you burn in March, you're going to get this and this and this. And so those research plots are really good. We've got them at Beaver. I believe they're working on some at Pack Saddle. They're also working on some at Pushmataha. WMA down in the southeast has had one for, God, I don't know how long, but it's been there a while. And the one at Pushmataha has led to research going on in Tennessee and Georgia and other southeastern pine states that have led to a lot of good management on the landscape from Pushmataha WMA.
That's pretty neat. So, and I asked, well, I've had several what I would call conservation people on the podcast. I always like to ask them, out of all that scientific research, what have you learned that you think would help me harvest more bobwhite quail with my bird dogs?
It's a good question. I thought these were supposed to be easy questions today, man. At the end of the day, we're learning a lot of things that we've done wrong as a society, as a people, as a bunch of landowners, and those things are what have led to the numbers that we see today. And the biggest, the coolest thing that I've learned is that if you stop doing the wrong stuff and you start doing the right stuff, the quail respond. For lack of better terms, that movie Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
And, I was talking to a landowner just today that was out south of Weatherford, which, south of Weatherford, they've been in drought this year. They've had a couple of really bad weather years that their bird population's down. It's down probably more than anywhere else in the state. And he said, man, I've got one covey of 8 birds on my quarter section. What can I do? I said, well, let's look at your property. He said, I'm already going to get rid of all my red cedars and I want to burn. I said, well, then you don't really need to do anything else. That fixes it. One of the ways that I kind of get that point across to folks is imagine that you live in a 3-bedroom house. Can you live there?
Sure.
What if you have wife and kids? Can you still live there?
Absolutely.
Okay, so everybody's comfy in a 3-bedroom house. Now imagine that, a tornado, a hailstorm, a random semi, a freight train, whatever, comes through and knocks out 2 of the bedrooms, half the living room, half the kitchen. Can you still live there?
Probably, but it's not going to be very fun.
No, it's not going to be fun. It's going to be cramped, but you've still got, food. You still got your kitchen. You've still got a loafing area. You still got your living room. You still have a place to go to bed. You still have a bathroom. You still got a closet. You can still live there, but it's going to be cramped. Now what happens if the roof starts leaking in that master bedroom that's left? You're probably going to have to move out, right?
Yeah.
So, but you wouldn't move out of your house just because of a leaky roof, right?
Nope.
No, that makes no sense. But now this seemingly small thing that historically would have made no impact or very little impact to you, now is making a huge impact. Well, now imagine it with quail, except now we're going to go all the way down to they've only got a closet left. That's basically what we've done with upland game bird habitat, is we've restricted it so much that they've got a habitat, or they've got the habitat of a closet left, rather than that whole 3-bedroom house. And so now these things like disease, like predators, all these other things that everybody says is the silver bullet seem like they're making a really big impact when really they're just a leaky roof.
I'll be. That's a great analogy, by the way.
That was one of our upland updates that I kept having this, the question come up of, well, it can't be weather, it can't be habitat. Well, imagine it with you, and all of a sudden you can kind of start to understand or put the pieces together a little bit bigger that, maybe that habitat is a pretty big component.
Well, and I'm going to tell you, I saw this weekend on Saturday, I saw 4, maybe 5 different vehicles full of quail hunters, and spoke with some of those men all out here on Beaver River, and some of them had found birds, many of them had found and shot quail. But when you're talking about chasing a quail in the closet, it makes you wonder if the pressure at some point becomes a problem.
Well, our WMAs do get very heavily pressured, especially when we're talking ones in northwest Oklahoma, like Beaver River or Cimarron Hills or Cooper, or, any of those tracks. But on the same note, if the property across the road is not, a fence line to fence line ag field or just plowed up dirt at this time of year, there's birds there. And so, we have a constant inflow of birds coming in and out of a WMA that at the end of the day, our job as a department is to provide an opportunity to the sportsman. We've got to do that equally, and we've got to provide everybody a chance. So things like Beaver River, you can only hunt till 4:30. Yeah, that's one thing that we've done to kind of taper that down a little bit while still trying to give everybody that fair shake at getting on birds, but at the same time, kind of giving the birds a break so that they've got ample opportunity to get together in the evenings to make sure that they get covied up so that they have the best chance of survival into the night. Whereas if we could hunt them all the way till sunset or 30 minutes after sunset, like some of our game species in Oklahoma, they're more likely to face predation if they're broken up as a covey right there at sunset.
Yeah, and I've always thought that's a good idea. It lets them get covied back up and get comfortable before the sun goes down. Yep. Hopefully keeps us from losing as many birds to predators as we might otherwise.
Well, and we also see in years like this where our numbers aren't exactly where we want them, we see a lot of self-regulation. So this, in a year like this year and last year especially, most hunters aren't really seeking a bag limit of birds. Like for instance, on opening day, I got 1 bird and was happy. Great, I got my bird to break the seal on the season. Let's go get everybody else on some birds. Yeah. Because at the end of the day, bird hunting in general, especially quail hunting, it's not about filling a freezer. it's about the heritage, the tradition, the bragging rights of my dog honored the point better than your dog.
Yeah.
It's about that just tradition and the brotherhood, if you want to call it that, or the kindred spirits that you get out there with a group of bird hunters. And so it's not I want to fill my bag all the way to the brim so that I can have the most birds. It's I want to have the best story.
Well, I told my dad opening weekend, my 76-year-old father shot a quail. We were going home, and we walk a lot when we hunt. I mean, we cover a lot of ground on foot. And
yeah.
My dad said to me, he said, "Now, Ryan, there's easier ways to kill quail or to hunt quail." And I said, "Dad, I'm not really hunting quail." I said, "I know you think I'm hunting quail, but what I'm really actually hunting is a dog pointing at quail."
Yep.
And he said, "Well, and if that's what you're hunting, you're probably doing it about the easiest way you can."
Yeah. Well, I mean, you get on the Facebook groups for the quail hunting in Oklahoma, and all of the videos aren't of the dog bringing back a quail.
Yeah.
The videos are of the dogs holding on point.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Whereas if you're a deer hunter, the video is of you shooting the deer.
Yeah.
Or of you posing with the deer that you've harvested. So there is a separation there between the tradition of upland hunting and the tradition of hunting for sustenance. If you think back 100 years ago, or go ahead.
On my video, on my YouTube page, I can tell you can see lots of video of dogs on point, yep. But you can also see a lot of video of me missing bucklight quail.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of those videos out there as well. Especially after you're 5-6 miles into a trek for the day. Yeah.
My failure is pretty evident. You spend much time on my YouTube page.
Oh, goodness. So, talking about public lands and things like that, there is some additional research. I know we talked a little bit on that earlier. I was trying to get it pulled up here on my computer while we're talking about it. But so if you go to one of our WMAs around the state, you may find a quail wing box. Yeah. And so, historically we looked at, what the demographics were of the birds that we were hunting. And so is it a male or a female? Is it a juvenile or an adult? All right, great. Move on to the next wing. Well, back in the 80s, there was a researcher that found that you can actually measure the primary length to know exactly how old the bird is, if it's a juvenile that's less than 150 days old. So one thing, and I'm really pushing folks to try to get as many wings as I can because, I don't have enough stuff going on, the laundry list we talked about, but I actually go through every one of those wings and look, is it a juvenile? Is it an adult? Is it a male? Is it a female? The new survey that's with those the wing boxes this year, where are people hunting? So do people know what kind of forage that they're harvesting birds out of? So are they in sunflower? Do they think they're in corn, which you're going to be hard-pressed to find any corn on a wildlife management area. It's just not one of the tools that we use to manage. And then I'm looking at the age demographics even deeper to know what our breakdown is of juveniles. So when was our peak hatch? How many hatches did we have on this WMA? Which one was the best one? How does that relate to the rainfall that we had in this area? How does that relate to a metric called the NDVI, which is a picture from space to see how green the area was.
No, we
so
don't.
The greener it was, the higher the NDVI. And so, for instance, last year when I inherited this job or came into this job, I had one bag of wings from Cooper WMA, and so I was able to go through all those wings from Cooper and chart all that out and find that, last year we had these really strong, really big rains that really kind of tapered off and impacted the nesting season, especially right there at the end. And man, it's like clockwork. You've got a great hatch, you've got a great hatch, you've got an even better hatch, and then you've got all this rain and you've got no bird survival after that heavy rain.
Yeah, I think that's what happened out here at Beaver this year.
Yeah, so it was the reverse of that. So we had heavy rains right at the beginning of nesting season. And so the first nesting attempt was just shot. There was very little survival out of that, generally speaking. In pockets around the state, there are a few birds that I'm seeing that were in that time frame, but for the most part, those birds didn't make it. But those heavy rains brought on an excellent forb crop, a bumper insect crop, So all of the future hatches, so the second, the third, even the fourth attempt, they had really high success rates because of all of the resources that were around because of that heavy rainfall. So, it's a balancing match between the rainfall and the temperature and when those rainfalls come, and it's got to be perfect for them to really have a boom year. But the more of that land that we can make good quail habitat, the bigger we can make their closet, maybe even move them back out into the bedroom in that previous reference, then they've got more room to go and have those resources. Even in a lower year, the resources can still be there.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It's frustrating to me. I get asked a lot, and by a lot, I get asked a lot. What's the quail look like? Are we going to have?
Well, they're a little bird. They've got a little white on their face, and
yeah. and I mean, I just don't have any good answers. One thing I did learn this year is that the survey you guys do is pretty stinking accurate. Because I thought we were going to have a lot more birds than my gut was telling me, based on what I'd seen out working on the farm and just generally out running my dogs for conditioning. I felt like there was more birds than what I'm finding now that I'm in the field hunting. And when I saw that October survey, those results, I was like, oh, surely that's too low. We're going to have more. Now we haven't. You guys were right.
Well, and I'm not going to take anything that it was me that did that. There's 83 routes that are run in the state of Oklahoma, and that is a lot of work to get these reports done from WMA biologists. Even some of our staff at our headquarters in Oklahoma City go out and do these surveys. And it is the result of a lot of hard work and dedicated work by your public servants that serve the sportsmen of the state of Oklahoma to make sure that we're getting the best data. Some years it's really tough. These routes, for like the brood surveys and the roadside surveys, it's a 20-mile route in each county except Oklahoma and Tulsa County. And so you're looking at one little snapshot of one morning on one 20-mile-an-hour or 20-mile route to see were there quail there. And, some years it's spot on. Some years it's a little off. Some years it's a little low. Some years it's a little high. But, this year it was definitely right on the money. And part of that is because of how that weather and temperature and all of the other aspects played into it, that it really made the numbers make sense. But, had there been huge flooding rainfalls right after we did the survey, then it would have been way overestimated.
Yeah. So, and I got to ask you this because I told one of my friends that I would. He lives up in Grove, and he has been looking for a WMA up in that northeast part of the state that has a population of bobwhite quail. If you were going to send somebody quail hunting up there in the northeast, which WMA would you send them to, Tal?
That's a tough one. Yeah, that is a loaded question. So there are birds out there. A big part of it in northeastern Oklahoma. First, I'll say Oklahoma is probably the most diverse state in the nation. Texas might be there, but it's huge, so it makes sense.
Yeah.
But as far as for our size, I mean, we've got everything from desert to swamp, pronghorn to alligators. There's not many states that have that. And so, each little strip of Oklahoma has its own issues. And, northeastern Oklahoma, one of the big things is the timber getting too thick.
Yeah.
And so, I, as a bird hunter, if I was in northeastern Oklahoma, I would spend time just out on the WMAs, whether that's deer hunting or turkey hunting or you name it, and looking for the areas where that habitat is right. I will say that not necessarily right now because it is a fairly new WMA, but Neosho River, Neosho Bottoms, that's probably going to be a pretty good spot here in the next couple of years.
Okay. Well, there's his answer. I told him I'd ask.
So, if he wanted a spot that wasn't, right there in northwestern Oklahoma, Caw is not a bad one. Yeah, that's the northeastern part of the state really is a tough one to send people to. just
And
because
there's a lot of Tulsa quail hunters, you know.
Yes, yeah,
There's a lot of guys over there that really love to quail hunt, where they have to travel to do it, don't they?
Yep. Yeah. Well, and that's there are pockets of quail everywhere. It's getting the land management done and put together in the right time frame to be able to go. And this year, if you look at the rainfall map for that northeastern part of the state, I mean, they had twice their annual rainfall by July. So that northeastern part was really, really impacted this spring in a negative way. That it just made it tough for the birds to live. Especially, they don't know how to work a canoe yet. So I've been trying to put on lessons for them, but they just can't quite get it under their wing.
I've never seen one swim.
Yeah. Well, they I forget where it was. It was one of the groups that I'm a part of. They had actually done a research program with some juvenile birds. They were pen raising some birds to do some food studies or something, and one fell in a water dish or something, and the bird takes off swimming.
Oh, he does.
So they do have the ability to swim, but it's not good for them.
I've never seen them do it. So.
Yeah.
But out here in northwest Oklahoma, we don't have much standing water anyway, so their opportunities to swim would be pretty limited.
Well, that time it rained 40 days and 40 nights. I think you guys got a quarter of an inch. So.
I think we might have got a quarter of an inch out of that. Tell our hour's up, if you can believe it. I was looking forward to talking with you about your story about how you came to hunting, but we're going to have to save that for another episode.
That may have to wait for another one. So,
as a quail hunter, I will tell you this, that my conversation with you tonight has given me a lot of confidence that our upland game here in the state of Oklahoma is in very capable hands.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. And, I want the bird hunters to know, I want you to know as a sportsman that I don't take this job lightly. I put in the same amount of money that you put in to be able to buy your licenses and have a place to hunt and have an opportunity to hunt and have animals to hunt. And I don't take the responsibility given to me to manage that resource for you lightly.
Yeah, I can tell. I mean, it's obvious to me. And I appreciate it, because those little birds are pretty stinking important to me, to be honest with you.
That they are. You can go back and find writings of Aldo Leopold chasing them. You can go back and find writings of Teddy Roosevelt chasing them. And if it's something that both of those gentlemen wanted to go chase after, then they're definitely worth putting the time and effort into to make sure that we're preserving it for not only our children, but our grandchildren and even their children, because they deserve the same resource and same opportunity that we have today.
Yeah. Well, I look forward, to having you back on.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
That we can talk about your hunting origination story, and also talk about all the other interesting things that you're doing for whitetail and turkey and wildlife in general in the state of Oklahoma.
I can't wait. And, as a parting word, I would say to the bird hunters out there, to the upland game hunters, get out there, work some land, trust your dog, and make a memory. Enjoy the Oklahoma outdoors.
Yeah. We'll tell you have a wonderful evening.
Hey, I appreciate it, and thank you so much for having me on, and I can't wait to come back and talk more on quail.
All right.
Gee, sure. Come on. All right, I'm going to go over. You stay on this side.
We both tagged up. Holy crap. Two.
Get that bird.